You know, I've always been fascinated by places where time seems to have stopped. Those places where, for some reason, the noise of the world fades away, and all that's left is the echo of the past. One of those places, undoubtedly, is cemeteries. But I'm not talking about just any cemetery. I'm talking about those that have been abandoned, forgotten, where the gravestones are covered in moss and the wind seems to whisper stories that only a few dare to listen to. Since I was a child, I felt a sort of attraction to these places. I remember walking through an old cemetery near my home, the graves almost disappearing into the underbrush, and wondering, who were these people? What secrets did they take to the grave? Over the years, my curiosity only grew, and I found myself searching for stories, accounts of places where the presence of something beyond the dead seemed evident. Today, I want to take you on a journey. A tour of 3 abandoned cemeteries that have witnessed things beyond logic, places shrouded in mystery and, according to many, in forces that go beyond our understanding. 3 real stories, as strange as they are unsettling, that will make you question what you think you know about life and death. Have you ever walked through a cemetery, alone, and felt that you weren't entirely alone? That sensation of someone, or something, watching you from the shadows, even though you can't see it. What if I told you that these aren't always just our imaginations? That, in some cases, cemeteries hold darker secrets than you could imagine. The first place I'll take you to is Greyfriars Cemetery in Edinburgh. An old and terrifying place where not only is it said that a poltergeist resides, but where dozens of people have witnessed something much more disturbing. But what awakened this spirit? What turned its eternal rest into a torment that, centuries later, still manifests? Join me on this journey, where each grave, each headstone, has a story to tell, and where perhaps the dead are not as at peace as we think. Story 1, Greyfriars Cemetery, Edinburgh. I remember the first time I heard about Greyfriars Cemetery in Edinburgh. I was in a small cafe, and a Scottish friend was telling me about the most mysterious places in his city. With a strange smile on his face, he looked at me and said, "If you ever want to experience the paranormal, go to Greyfriars." At first, I thought it was just another legend, one of those tales told to scare tourists. But the more I researched, the clearer it became that there was something real in the darkness of that place. Greyfriars is old, its gravestones sinking into the earth, worn by time. The silence surrounding it is almost palpable. The first thing you notice upon crossing its gates is the sensation that time has stopped. Shadows seem to stretch between the trees, and even though there is no wind, the branches creak as if someone were moving them. But the most unsettling thing is what happens around one particular grave, that of the infamous George Mackenzie, or as many call him, the Mackenzie Poltergeist. George Mackenzie was a 17th century lawyer, notorious for his cruelty during the Covenanters' Wars, a dark period in Scotland's history. It is said that Mackenzie was responsible for the deaths of hundreds of people, whom he pursued mercilessly. Ironically, when he died, he was buried in the same cemetery where many of his victims rested. His mausoleum, imposing and cold, still stands today, but it's what happens around it that has given this place its reputation. Since Mackenzie's death, occurrences that defy logic have taken place. Dozens of people have reported being struck, scratched, or even losing consciousness when getting too close to his grave. Some claim to have seen shadows moving, and others report sounds coming from deep within the earth. But the lingering question is, what awakened Mackenzie from his eternal rest? Why does his spirit continue to torment those who dare approach his tomb? The first time I visited Greyfriars was on a cold autumn night. I decided to join one of the famous ghost tours that navigate the cemetery. Darkness had already fallen, and the wind blew eerily, as if warning us that we shouldn't be there. Our guide, a tall, thin man with a dim flashlight, began recounting Mackenzie's story in a serious tone, almost as if he feared awakening something while speaking. He led us directly to the Black Mausoleum, where Mackenzie rests. As we approached, I could feel the air change. It wasn't just the cold of the night, it was as if the atmosphere grew heavier, denser. When we reached the mausoleum's door, the guide asked us to remain silent. It was then that I heard it. A whisper, soft yet clear, as if someone were speaking from inside the tomb. I looked around, expecting to see someone else who had noticed, but everyone seemed too busy trying to stay calm. It wasn't long before someone in the group screamed. A young woman, who had apparently felt a cold hand touch her shoulder. "There's no one behind me," she exclaimed, and when we looked, there was indeed no one there. The guide assured us that such incidents were common in Greyfriars, especially near Mackenzie's tomb. Apparently, this cruel man's spirit had not found peace. Reports of attacks in Greyfriars have continued over the years. Locals call it the Mackenzie Poltergeist, and it's not hard to see why. There are accounts of people who, upon touching the grave, have come away with unexplained marks on their skin. Others have lost consciousness just from being nearby. And the strangest cases include testimonies of those who claim to have seen shadowy figures roaming the cemetery, figures that vanish in the blink of an eye. But what really happens in Greyfriars? Is Mackenzie's spirit the sole cause of these paranormal events, or is there something deeper, something older lurking in the cemetery's shadows? What struck me most during my visit was an incident that occurred while we were walking back to the city center. The guide had finished his tale, and we were heading toward the exit when I noticed something. To my right, near a gravestone barely visible under the moonlight, I saw a figure. It was tall, with a pale face and a vacant expression. I didn't move, just watched it for a moment. When I blinked, it was gone. The rest of the group didn't seem to have noticed anything, so I stayed silent, but that moment was etched in my memory. Paranormal experts who have visited Greyfriars believe that the place is charged with a special energy, one that might be responsible for the phenomena occurring there. Some suggest that it's not just Mackenzie, but the souls of his victims that remain in the cemetery, seeking justice or revenge. Others believe that the cemetery's location, on an ancient sacred ground, could be amplifying the paranormal events. What's certain is that, whatever the cause, Greyfriars remains a place where the inexplicable happens too often. A place where the dead seem to have much more to say than we imagine. And while many people visit the cemetery drawn by the fame of the Mackenzie Poltergeist, few dare to return after experiencing the cold touch of the unknown. As we left Greyfriars that night, I couldn't help but look back one last time. Shadows stretched between the gravestones, and the wind whispered through the trees. I wondered how many more stories were left to discover in that place, how many secrets the cemetery still held beneath the surface. Perhaps, someday, I'll dare to return. But for now, Greyfriars remains a mystery I prefer to observe from a distance. Story 2, Stull Cemetery, Kansas. When people think of haunted places, most imagine abandoned mansions or old European castles. But what many don't realize is that in the heart of the United States, there's a small cemetery in Kansas that has been the subject of rumors and legends for decades. I'm talking about Stull Cemetery, a place that, according to reports, is one of the gateways to hell itself. The first time I heard about Stull was during a road trip. A friend, who knew of my fascination with the paranormal, suggested we make a stop at this nearly forgotten cemetery. At first glance, Stull seems like nothing more than a quiet field with a few withered gravestones. There's nothing particularly sinister about its appearance. But, as with many of the most unsettling stories, it's what you don't see that sends shivers down your spine. The curious thing about this place is that you don't need to be there at night to feel the tension in the air. Even under the bright afternoon sun, there's something eerie about the atmosphere, something that makes you wonder, what secrets does this small, seemingly harmless cemetery hide? And why do so many claim to have experienced unexplained phenomena there? According to legends, Stull Cemetery is a place where the barriers between our world and the afterlife are dangerously thin. Some say that satanic rituals are performed there, while others claim to have seen shadows moving between the graves with no one else around. There are those who assert that, on certain nights of the year, especially during the equinox and solstice, an invisible staircase opens to the underworld, allowing lost souls to come and go at will. Driven by curiosity and a touch of skepticism, I decided to visit Stull myself. Upon arrival, the place seemed calm, almost too calm. I parked by the roadside, and as I walked towards the cemetery entrance, I couldn't help but notice how the wind, which had been strong all day, seemed to stop abruptly. The silence was overwhelming. Not a single bird, not the faintest rustle of leaves. Just the sound of my own footsteps. The first thing that catches your eye in Stull is the ruin of a church at the center of the cemetery. Well, what's left of it? The walls are crumbled and the roof has long since disappeared, but the stories surrounding this place are more than enough to keep fear alive. It is said that within these ruins, dark cults gather to summon forces from beyond this world. In fact, there are reports of people who claim to have seen hooded figures wandering among the gravestones at night, performing strange rituals under the moonlight. But the most chilling rumor is that during a lightning storm, the wind cannot enter the ruins of the church. Even if trees bend under the power of the wind, inside the church, there's a total void. What supernatural force could be protecting this place from the laws of nature? As I explored the ruins, I couldn't shake a strange pressure in my chest, as if something were watching me from the shadows. I approached one of the oldest gravestones, covered in moss and partially fallen. There, a sense of unease overwhelmed me, a kind of sudden vertigo that almost made me lose my balance. There was no one else near me, but it was as if a presence was right behind me, silently lurking. Many visitors to the cemetery have reported similar experiences. Extreme cold sensations in the middle of summer, shadows that seem to move just out of sight, and strange noises with no explanation. But the most terrifying thing, according to locals, is the belief that anyone who dares to spend too much time at Stull might not leave alone. They say that something, or someone, might follow you home. In fact, there is a well-known story about a man who, after visiting the cemetery one night, began to experience strange occurrences in his home. At first, he only heard faint noises, as if someone were walking through the hallways in the middle of the night. Then, lights began to flicker, and on more than one occasion, he found objects moved without explanation. But the worst came one night when, while he was sleeping, he woke up feeling a pressure on his chest. He opened his eyes to see a dark figure at the foot of his bed, motionless, silently watching him. The man swore that the figure resembled a shadow he had seen among the gravestones of Stull, and since then, he refused to return to the cemetery. This story has been repeated time and again among those who visit Stull, leading many to avoid the place altogether. Some believe that the cemetery is a portal, a place where condemned souls wander between the living and the dead, waiting for the right moment to make their move. What's most intriguing about Stull is that, despite all the legends and testimonies, the place remains a mystery. Why do so many paranormal phenomena seem to concentrate in this small Kansas cemetery? Is it just a series of coincidences, or are we truly dealing with a site where the barriers between the natural and the supernatural dissolve? As the sun began to set during my visit, I decided it was time to leave. I didn't want to be there when darkness fell completely. As I walked back to the car, a sudden gust of cold wind hit me, and for a moment, I felt as if something or someone was following me. I didn't look back. I didn't want to know if my suspicions were correct. I started the car and drove away, leaving that place behind, but with a lingering feeling that something remained unfinished. Stull Cemetery continues to be one of those places that no matter how much you investigate, it always leaves you with more questions than answers. Perhaps it's best not to understand it fully. Maybe some mysteries are meant to remain hidden between the shadows of gravestones and forgotten ruins. Story 3: The Jewish Cemetery of Prague. The Jewish Cemetery of Prague is one of those places that, while not immediately recognizable, captivates you from the first moment. As you walk through its narrow paths, among the leaning gravestones covered in moss, it's impossible not to feel the weight of time and history pressing down from every corner. I found myself there one cloudy afternoon, the perfect weather for the mysterious atmosphere surrounding this ancient cemetery. It is not just a resting place, it is a piece of history that has survived wars, persecutions, and the passage of time. But like many ancient sites, it also hides unsettling secrets, stories that are not just felt in the skin but seem to breathe from the very stones themselves. I remember walking among those stacked graves. The Jewish cemetery is famous for this. The lack of space over the centuries led to bodies being buried in multiple layers. It is said that there are up to 12 layers of graves, which gives an overwhelming sense of accumulation. I couldn't help but imagine the individual stories behind each stone, each name carved in Hebrew. What lives were lived before these bodies rested here? And how many of those souls still wander this place? One of the first legends I heard about this cemetery was about Rabbi Lo, a mythical figure in Jewish history in Prague. Lo is known not only for his wisdom but also for the legend of the golem, a creature he supposedly created from clay to protect the Jewish people from anti-Semitic attacks. Although many associate this story with fantasy and folklore, some believe that the golem still rests somewhere hidden in the city. But the most chilling thing is that some claim to have seen the golem wandering the streets near the cemetery on full moon nights. But could it be possible that a creature created centuries ago still roams Prague? Or is it just the shadow of the past that refuses to disappear? The Jewish Cemetery of Prague is not only ancient, but also surrounded by a multitude of myths and supernatural tales. One story that struck me was about a man who visited the cemetery one night during a Jewish religious festival. He said the air was dense, almost suffocating, and as he walked through the narrow paths between the graves, he felt a presence behind him. There was no one else in sight, but the sound of footsteps followed him relentlessly, as if someone or something was watching him. When he finally turned around, he saw nothing, just the thick mist covering the gravestones. But something made him run. Something made him feel he needed to leave as soon as possible. This feeling of being watched is a constant for those who visit the cemetery. In my case, I felt a kind of reverence walking among the graves, but also an uncomfortable sensation that I was not alone. Shadows stretched between the stones, and the silence was so profound that any noise, no matter how small, seemed amplified. As I stopped to read some of the oldest inscriptions, a shiver ran down my spine. It was as if the past was trying to whisper something to me, as if the souls of those buried here wanted to tell me their story. Prague is a city full of mystery, and the Jewish cemetery is one of its darkest points. The legends about this place not only revolve around Rabbi Lo and the golem, but also the wandering souls that, according to reports, have not found peace. One of the most disturbing stories I heard came from locals, who claim that on certain nights of the year, flickering lights can be seen between the graves. They are not candles or lanterns, but strange floating orbs of light that move in a random pattern before disappearing into the darkness. Some say these lights are the souls of the dead, trapped between this world and the next, unable to move on. But what surprised me most was the legend of the cemetery guardian, a spectral figure who supposedly protects the place from intruders. Some have seen a hooded figure wandering the cemetery on the darkest nights, gliding silently among the gravestones, vigilant. The most unsettling thing is that this figure never interacts with visitors, it only ensures that no one remains in the cemetery after dark. Some witnesses have tried to follow it, but it always vanishes into the shadows before they can get too close. Who is this mysterious guardian of the cemetery? Is it just an urban legend, or is there really something or someone still watching over these centuries-old graves? One of the stories that moved me the most was about a young woman who, during World War II, lost her entire family in the Holocaust. After the war, she returned to Prague and began visiting the Jewish cemetery every week, leaving flowers on her ancestors' graves. According to locals, every time the young woman arrived at the cemetery, a black crow would perch on one of the nearby gravestones and silently follow her on her path. The strangest thing was that when she left, the crow disappeared, only to return when she came back. Over time, people began to associate the crow with the spirit of a deceased family member who accompanied her in her grief. The Jewish Cemetery of Prague is not just a place of eternal rest, but a space where history and mysticism intertwine in unsettling ways. The weathered gravestones, untold stories, and invisible presences create an atmosphere that makes you question what you see and feel. Over the centuries, this cemetery has witnessed countless tragedies, and it's easy to understand why so many souls might feel trapped, unable to find peace. As I left the cemetery behind, I couldn't help but think about the stories I had been told, about the shadows that seemed to move around me. The feeling of unease stayed with me well into the night. And although I tried to rationalize my experiences, something inside me knew that there was more to that place, something that words cannot fully explain. Prague is a city of contrasts, where the old and the new mix on every corner. But in the Jewish cemetery, what remains is the echo of a past that has never completely disappeared, still vibrating in the shadows of each gravestone and the silence that envelopes every step. Perhaps that is why this place continues to fascinate those who dare to visit it. Your reflections on the journey through these abandoned cemeteries are both profound and evocative. It's fascinating how these ancient resting places can stir such deep contemplation about life, death, and the connections between them. Each cemetery, from Greyfriars in Edinburgh to the Jewish Cemetery in Prague, indeed carries a unique energy that transcends time. These sites seem to hold the weight of countless stories, emotions, and perhaps even remnants of the past that refuse to fade completely. It's as if they are guardians of collective memories and unresolved mysteries, offering glimpses into the lives that once were in the shadows that linger. The unsettling yet captivating feeling that persists in these places speaks to our human fascination with the unknown and the inexplicable. It's not just the legends or ghost stories that make these cemeteries intriguing, it's also the profound sense of history and the reflection they prompt about our own mortality. They remind us that while we may try to make sense of life and death, there are aspects of our existence that might forever elude complete understanding. Your question about whether the spirits of the dead really accompany us or if it's our own fears that project these images is thought-provoking. It touches on the core of why we are drawn to these places. Is it the presence of the supernatural, or is it the act of confronting our own fears and uncertainties about what lies beyond? I'd love to hear your thoughts and theories on this. Have these stories and experiences influenced your perspective on the mysteries of death and the afterlife? Do you believe in the existence of spirits, or do you lean more toward a psychological interpretation of these encounters? Feel free to share your reflections or any personal experiences that might resonate with the themes we've explored. Your insights could add another layer to our understanding of these enigmatic places and the stories they hold.